So guess who Rachel Maddow had on her show? AOC. And specifically, Rachel Maddow questioned AOC on how AOC wants to force her agenda. And the words that they try to not use, force the vote, it just seems really obvious that they're trying to, both Rachel Maddow and AOC are dancing around that phrase. And they have to, because if they mention that strategy, then everyone's going to be like, wait, AOC could have gotten us healthcare the whole time? She could have gotten us Medicare for all right now? She can get us Medicare for all right now by forcing a vote? She can get us a $15 living wage or $20, $35 minimum wage if she wanted to right now. She can get us all housing rights right now. She can force all of these into legislation. How does she do that? She basically says, listen, I'm not going to let any bills pass. Full stop. Not letting any bills pass. If you want a bill to pass, too bad. I want this. And if you don't give me all of those things, then I'm not going to let you pass any bill, and your government's going to fall apart. That's what AOC should be doing. That's what she ran on doing. And unfortunately, that's not what she is doing. She used to go on Jimmy Dore's show. That was the first show she went on, AOC. And now she's going on Rachel Maddow's show, and she's just kind of buying into the propaganda that's being embedded within the narrative that Rachel Maddow presupposes throughout this whole conversation. So take a look at this video, and then we'll talk about it.
Plan is a big plan. It is full of big ideas, but a lot of the most interesting stories are in the granular details. But again,
it's a big idea, big plans, $2 trillion spread over 8 years. Spread over 8 years. They don't tell you that part.
This is just his opening gambit. This is what he's asking for. What happens to it now is going to be in the hands of the Congress. Joining us now is one of the most influential members of that body, New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Congresswoman, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for making time to be here tonight.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So, as I know, you saw the president's speech today, and we've all been reading about and learning about what the president is asking for in this American Jobs Plan. What do you think of it?
What do you think of Biden's infrastructure plan? Great question, Rachel Maddow. Let's see the answer.
You know, I think that the vision that President Biden and the administration has laid out, you're right, has surprised a lot of us in a positive way.
It surprised us in a positive way. I kind of surprised me in a negative way. Spending $2 trillion over 8 years, $250 billion a year. That's what Joe Biden cares about infrastructure. Pour just like $250 billion every year into infrastructure, and that'll save the economy and jobs. That'll get us all the jobs that we need. What's positive about that, AOC? There's nothing positive about that.
And in the detail and the thought that's here, the scope of it is really encouraging, except...
It's not. Except it's not.
I think the how, that 2.2 trillion, 2.25 over 8 years, I have serious concerns.
Really? What are your concerns about that, AOC?
That it's not enough to realize the very inspiring vision.
Yeah, you and I both know that spending like $300 billion a year is really not going to solve all of our problems with infrastructure.
That Biden has advanced. And so I believe that those of us here, especially as progressives within the Democratic Party, we know that there is so much more opportunity here.
Oh, there's opportunity? Ooh, get ready, everyone. There's opportunity. Get on your, get ready. Here we go. Opportunity time.
And in order for us to realize this inspiring vision, we need to go way higher.
Ooh, we got to go way higher. And what are you going to do that? What are you going to do that, AOC? What is the thing that you're going to do to actually force better legislation? What are you going to do?
And that's what's going to help us actually deliver on this really promising and inspiring vision that the president has laid out today.
What are you going to do?
And when you say that it should be bigger, do you want the numbers associated with the things that the president says he wants done just to get bigger, just to do more of the things he's saying he wants to do? Or are there whole new categories of policy that you'd like to see folded into this bill that aren't there now?
So the question is like basically what more are you asking for? Great question. And then so Rachel Maddow is prepping AOC. So AOC is forced to explain why it's not enough. And so she has to go through a bunch of reasons. And it's going to be unfortunate. She's never going to mention a high-speed rail, which you and I both know was something we really desperately need in the U.S. right now. Just a bunch of high-speed rails everywhere. But unfortunately, we don't have that. So Rachel Maddow is prepping AOC by forcing her to say, I want all of these things added onto it. And then Rachel Maddow is going to ask, how? And that's when it gets really interesting.
I think there are a couple areas there. One is that, first of all, this is 2.25 trillion over 8 years. For context, because these huge numbers are hard to understand, for context, we passed an almost $2 trillion COVID relief package that's supposed to last us 1 year with some provisions.
And it doesn't last us 1 year. All of the problems that existed before the COVID bill existed after the COVID bill and still exist.
Lasting up to 2 years. So the $1,400 stimulus checks, that big package that we felt in our lives.
That big package that we felt in our lives. She's really trying to push that package as like a positive thing, but it really isn't. Where's the $2,000 was a lie. The $15 minimum wage wasn't forced into the bill that AOC or Bernie Sanders or any progressive could have forced into the bill by blocking all legislation until it gets in. That's called being a hero.
We're deployed on a shorter timeline. So I think that if we need to really have some shorter timelines, some urgency, greater urgency in this package. And I think that some of these investments need to be greater. So for example, let's take public housing. This plan, this Build Back Better plan, it advocates for a total national investment of $40 billion in public housing nationwide.
That's not enough.
Sounds great, right?
No.
Except when you consider the fact that the New York City public housing system needs $40 billion alone just to get up to code.
Exactly. So it's not enough, AOC. So you admit to that. Good.
People run out of heat.
Did you hear Rachel Maddow say? She knows that there it is. You just admitted that there's more to this bill that she needs in that bill, which means that Rachel Maddow is prepped. Right now, Rachel Maddow has her next question ready. That's why she laughed. She's waiting to ask the question, how? Get ready. So I'll let you listen to that.
Just to get up to code. During the wintertime, people run out of heat. They don't have hot water. They don't have electricity sometimes. There are holes in people's walls.
Here we go.
The New York City Public Housing Authority needs $40 billion alone just so that its residents can live in dignified housing because they've been underinvested in and starved, frankly, by Republican Congresses and administrations for so long.
So she just admitted logically that $40 billion is not enough, that she does not agree that $40 billion is enough.
So for us to actually invest in national public housing infrastructure, we need to do way more in order for us to deliver on this promise in terms of a price tag there.
There we go.
And I really do have to commend some of these investments that are in here. And some of these details, like
she's got to slobber over the bill a little bit because, I mean, she just beat it up a ton, right? And she knows what Rachel Maddow is getting ready for. She, like AOC, knows that she just ran herself into her own fucking trap. And so she has to now, before letting Rachel Maddow say anything, she has to defend the bill that she was just attacking. It still has great things.
Some of these investments that are in here, and some of these details like exclusionary zoning are things that progressives have been talking about for a long time. So there is a lot of credit there. But on climate, we can also go more. We can go deep.
We could go more. We could go deeper. Yeah, we could. You're right, AOC. So what are you going to do about that?
Deeper, and we can have a more integrated approach in how we push on this issue. Again, I do commend the administration in its scope, but in order for us to meet that vision, I have real concerns that 2.2 trillion isn't actually going to get us there. So we're going to have to make deeper investments to actually renew public housing.
Nowhere has she given a how yet. She just says, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this, we need to do that. What are you going to do about that? How are you going to use your leverage as a politician to get those things? What are you going to do? You're inside the Democratic Party, therefore you have leverage. Therefore you control what the party does and does not pass. And you can prevent all legislation from being passed by yourself. So force a vote.
To repeal the Fair Cloth Amendment, to increase our housing stock in the United States, and this at the end.
But it's not enough. You just gave a reason, all the reasons as to why it's not enough. You explained why it's not enough. So stop defending it.
The day is one of the greatest sources of income inequality in the country. It's rooted in housing and real estate.
In terms of how this is going to move, obviously this is the Biden administration's.
In terms of how is this going to move? Oh, AOC screwed.
Big legislative
she
lift.
feels
and
uncomfortable
I think we have to
now.
think of them as a living, breathing organism that learns lessons along the way.
What lessons have the Democratic Party learned? Which lessons? What lessons have they learned? They have not learned any lessons.
Clearly, I think a lot of what was going on with the COVID relief bills, they were thinking about things they wish they had done better.
Actually, they were supposed to think about what they promised, but instead, that's not what they did.
Or are handled differently under the Obama administration. Now I think they're going to be approaching this infrastructure bill, learning the lessons that they just learned for what happened with COVID relief. And it was, I think, a surprise to many in the Beltway when Joe Biden said for COVID relief he wanted $1.9 trillion.
Over 8 years. That doesn't excite the Rust Belt. That's not enough for the Rust Belt.
Everybody assumed that would get whittled way down and some much smaller package would ultimately pass.
It's starting small. It's starting so fucking small. It's not even $250 billion. It's like $250 billion a year. That's it. That's it on infrastructure. That's like, it's not even close to what we should be spending to maintain the shit that we have.
It didn't. It did get cut down a little bit, but not that much. It was basically a $1.9 trillion plan.
Over 1 year instead of over 8 years, and that's what AOC just explained to you, Rachel Maddow, if you were listening to AOC.
Sounds to me, from what I hear you saying tonight, that on this one, what may happen is that President Biden may say, listen, today in Pittsburgh, I want $2.25 trillion over 8 years, but when it lands in the House, you and your colleagues may say $2.25 trillion is a starting point, but this needs to be a bigger bill. This needs to get larger before the Senate even gets a look at it. Is it fair to expect that that may be the way this goes? That
you might decide to vote against Joe Biden's legislation? That's what Rachel Maddow is asking. That's called forcing a vote. That's force the vote. This is force the vote. What Rachel Maddow just said was force the vote. Let me explain. If you decide, hey, I'm not going to let any legislation pass, I'm going to vote against the bill. I'm going to vote with the Republicans. That's what Rachel Maddow is suggesting and AOC is suggesting. Well, I'll let AOC buy into it. Watch.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes. Force the vote. AOC. Yes. Yes.
If we could wave a magic wand and the progressives in the House were able to name any number and get it through.
You can. You name a number and you say, if you don't give us this, then we're not going to let you pass any legislation. Your government's going to be blocked from doing anything. And your popularity rating's just going to keep going down until you give the American people what they're asking you for, because populism is populist, right, AOC?
Which obviously isn't the case, but if we're looking at ideals and what we think is the actual investment that can create tens of millions of good union jobs in this country, that can shore up our healthcare, our infrastructure, our housing.
The only way she can get any of these things is if she forces the vote.
And doing it in a way that draws down our carbon emissions to help us get in line with the IPCC standards. We're talking about realistically $10 trillion over 10 years. And
realistically, $10 trillion. How are you just going to ask politely, or are you going to force a vote? $10 trillion. You want $10 trillion. You can either ask politely, which every time you've asked politely, you failed, Or you can decide to block all legislation until you get everything that you demand, which you can do right now because the House is not overwhelming majority Democrats. And so the Democrats don't have a lot of leverage. And so you have a lot of leverage if you vote with the Republicans and block legislation. So you block legislation until you get your demands. That's called Politics 101. It's Politics 101.
I know that may be an eye-popping figure for some people, but we need to understand that we are in a devastating economic moment. Millions of people in the United States are unemployed.
By the way, she's talking about $10 trillion over 8 years. So she's talking about spending a little bit over $1 trillion every year. So this year, how much are we going to spend on infrastructure? Just a little bit over $1 trillion. That's it. That's not going to give us our railways. That's not going to give us our high-speed rail. This is not enough. Ask for more. She's not even starting from a good place.
We have a truly crippled healthcare system and a planetary crisis on our hands, and we're the wealthiest nation in the history of the world.
So we should be able to do all of this.
So we can do 10 trillion.
We can do 10 trillion, so force it. Force it.
That is a thing of political imagination. However, even when you break it up into those two parts, what's important to remember is that this actually isn't just a progressive versus a moderate issue. You have some of the most conservative members of the Democratic caucus, like Joe Manchin, that have even signaled support for a $4 trillion infrastructure plan.
So what she's talking about is Joe Manchin wants to force a vote on $4 trillion and look like a hero. Joe Manchin wants to propose a $4 trillion. Joe Manchin wants to go to the left of Joe Biden. AOC is asking for 10 trillion, but she's just asking. And every time she asks for stuff, she doesn't get anything. So what else are you supposed to do, Kody? You block all legislation until you get your demands. You cause a ruckus. You say, listen, I'm not going to vote for anything you want me to pass. I am going to vote no to everything until you give me my demands. You force a vote. It's what happens every single time in history that's ever been a force a vote. That's how you get legislation passed, is you force a vote. That's what you do. You block legislation until you get what you demand. You force a vote.
Which is double in the numbers. And so I think that there's some key dynamics that have changed here, which explain some of this. One is that there is a genuine built power in the progressive caucus within the Democratic Party, but also just progressive ideals in general in the country that, that power has built very significantly. And we are in a fundamentally different political moment.
Yeah, where you now have the power. The progressives have the power. And so use it. Force a vote.
But on top of that is that even when you look at what comprises more moderate views in the caucus, economic populism that works and centers working class people is popular.
Economic populism is popular. So then force a vote on an economic populist policy. Just start passing populist policies and block the government until you get your demands. Just do that. And if Ilhan Omar wants to go alongside of you, she can. If she doesn't want to go alongside of you, she doesn't even have to, because you can have a lot of power by yourself, AOC. You have political leverage. Stop asking us to do your job.